So I'm feeling a little inferior right now. I've never chased Somali pirates or crossed out borders. All right, so I'm going to be talking about constituency campaigns in this presentation. I printed off my notes so I stay within the time limit. I don't incur the value of the organizers.
Is your microphone on?
Look to me now. Closer.
Yeah, you kind of need it.
All right, so you move forward. All right, so first I want to describe what these campaigns, constituency campaigns, actually look like and what campaign volunteers do. Then I want to address my myth, the idea that local campaigns and campaign volunteers don't make a difference in these races. I want to demonstrate to you that they actually do. Local campaigns matter. Now, before I get started, I want to ask, how many of you have actually been involved in a constituency campaign before, either national or provincial? I hear there's a provincial election. Okay, and the rest of you haven't been involved in a constituency race. So for those of you that have been involved, I kind of want to affirm to you that the work that you've done does have value, that it does make a difference. For those of you that haven't, same lesson, if you want to make a difference, it's actually a pretty good way to do so, and I'm going to show you how. So let's look at what constituency campaigns look like. So we can think of constituency campaigns as consisting of 4 concentric circles of personnel. The greatest number of people are what we call drop-ins. Then there's a smaller number of actual campaign volunteers. We're going to come back to these 2 groups. Then there's something called the candidate's inner circle. There are very few of these people. What these people do is they provide specialized services for the candidate. Legal services, financial services. This is where the campaign manager is. So this is a small group of leads. And then there's the candidate themselves. Some of you might have actually been a part of the candidate's inner circle in the past. But let's focus on drop-ins and campaign volunteers. The only difference between these 2 groups is the regularity with which they help the campaigns. Drop-ins drop in. They come in when they have time, when they have a bit of extra time. Those of you that have volunteered know that it's drop-ins that kind of lend local campaigns their chaotic character. They give the time that they can, but they're not there regularly. Campaign volunteers are there regularly. They show up on a regular basis, and campaigns can count on them being there routinely. So that's why we see a lot of students and a lot of seniors as campaign volunteers in local campaigns. So what do these people do? Well, they do the grunt work, a lot of non-specialized work that nonetheless is extremely important to the success of constituency campaigns. So first of all is canvassing. This is when volunteers accompany candidates when they go out and knock on people's doors, talk to them about issues, try to convince them to give them their votes. As we're going to see, this is an extremely effective campaign technique, actually going out, knocking on people's doors and talking to them. Very important, very effective. Campaign volunteers also deliver literature door to door. They do things like stand on freeways waving signs. Maybe some of you have seen that. It seems like very goofy behavior, but in fact, there's a real method to it. Local campaigns have to make contact with voters. If they can get in their faces, that's good for the campaigns. So actually this stuff is important. They also deliver literature door to door. Oh, I already said that, sorry. They phone voters to see if they're supportive. So a lot of you have gotten phone calls from people seeing if you actually support the party. There's not much persuasion here. When candidates go door to door, you'll get some persuasion, right? They'll try to convince you to vote for them. But volunteers tend not to do that over the phone. They're doing that, they're not doing it properly. The point here is to identify who the supporters are and who are not supporters so that you can actually get your supporters out to vote on election day. There's also lawn signs. Lawn signs are an important part of Canadian election campaigns, probably more important in Canada than anywhere else in the world. Campaigns don't use lawn signs to educate voters. They just put their names up on them. What campaign signs are used for is to create an impression of momentum for the candidate. So if you drive through a neighborhood and it's plastered with Shelley Glover signs, it creates this impression of momentum. It encourages supporters and it deflates opponents. And so campaign managers, when you talk to them, they have very specific strategies on how to put out these signs to create that sense of momentum. And finally, there's get out the vote activities. Now, once candidates know who they think will support them, volunteers call them on election day and ask if they voted. If they haven't, they encourage them to get out. And they also, it's a good local campaign, they offer rides, right? They'll have a fleet of cars and minivans, volunteers going to pick people up and drive them to the polls. This is important for senior citizens, people with limited mobility. It's a great way to get people out to vote. It used to be the case that campaigns would send people to people's homes to watch the kids while their parents went to vote. That doesn't happen anymore. It's a relic from the past. And finally, there's scrutineering. These people sit in the actual voting stations. They keep an eye out for election fraud, for those kinds of shenanigans. They also oftentimes can actually see who is voting. And they can send a list back to the campaign office so we can see not all of our supporters have not voted, give them a call, tell them to get out the vote, try to get them out. So a well-oiled election day machine can get the vote out and boost vote shares. So that's what local campaigners do. So the myth that I want to tackle is that local campaigns don't make a difference. Now, for a long time, political scientists thought that this was true, that local campaigns didn't make a difference. What really mattered was national campaigns. And this is particularly true because of communication technologies like television. Television allows leaders to speak directly to voters. Who cares what the local candidate is doing? You can see the Prime Minister campaigning up on the television set there. So on this view, when leaders perform well, local candidates will do well. When leaders perform poorly, local candidates are doomed, and there's nothing they can do about that. Now, there is an element of truth to that. Local candidates suffer when the leader doesn't perform well, but there are also things that they can do to help themselves move forward. So increasingly, political scientists are recognizing that local campaigning can make a difference in terms of increasing candidates' vote share. So there are certain things that campaigns can do that's related to enhanced vote shares, and they can do this entirely apart from the national campaign. And sometimes it's enough to win. In close races, the effect of local campaigning can push you over the top. In Canada, you only need more votes than the next candidate, and sometimes local campaigning can make all the difference. So what are those things? We've identified 3 things in separate studies that we can measure, and we can look at their influence on vote shares. Now, there's some disagreement about their relative impact, but there's broad agreement that these things matter for local campaigns. So first is the number of volunteers. Some studies have demonstrated that campaigns with more volunteers do better than those with fewer volunteers. They hold a bunch of other factors constant, and they look at whether or not it makes a difference, and it does. So campaigns with more volunteers tend to do better than those with fewer volunteers. Second is money. Again, when we hold other factors constant, we can see that campaigns that raise more money and spend more money tend to do better than campaigns with little money. And finally, most importantly, and most intriguingly, and most relevant to this presentation is the idea of voter contact. The amount of contact that campaigns have with voters. The more that campaigns can get in the faces of voters, the better they tend to do. So we've looked at measures of voter contact, and we've seen that, yeah, the more that campaigns can actually get in touch, get face time with voters, the better those campaigns tend to do. And of course, that has everything to do with campaign volunteers. So individuals can help campaigns by becoming volunteers, perhaps by donating money, and certainly by engaging in activities like canvassing. So this is a fairly old article from an academic journal. They used a very powerful method, an experimental methodology to explore the effects of different kinds of voter contact and to see whether or not it increased turnout. Now, this is about turnout. It's not about persuasion. It's about getting people out to vote. So, what they looked at were 3 different types of voter contact. First of all, personal face-to-face contact, the kind of stuff we see through canvassing, then mail pamphlets, and then phone calls. So what did they find? They actually found a big difference. Personal face-to-face contact was really important, really effective to getting people out to vote, making face contact. Mail was weak. It did have an effect, but getting pamphlets and mail it did have an effect, but it was weaker. And phone calls were useless. Getting a phone call does not encourage your people to get out to vote. And in fact, these two authors make a sort of a grand claim. They claim that as local campaigns have tended to not emphasize face-to-face contact anymore, as they tend to rely on phone calls, voter turnout has decreased over time. So they think that there's actually a connection there between local campaign techniques and the decline of voter turnout. So this is in fact one case where academics are catching up to people on the ground. One of the campaign managers that I spoke to for my own research said that his #1 job as the campaign manager was to get the candidate out of the campaign office. It's just useless having him in there. What you want is you want him out knocking on doors, going to events, hanging out at farmers markets, standing on freeways, anything to make face contact. And we can see, we've demonstrated experimentally that this is an effective way to locally campaign. So to wrap up, we can point to how local campaigns actually make a difference. And of course this is important for people like yourselves that might actually get involved as campaign volunteers. You make a difference by getting involved in this upcoming campaign, and you can certainly make a difference within the context of your own community as well, within your own ridings. I like to emphasize the point that academics are actually catching up to what people on the ground have known for a very long time. When you talk to people that campaign, they tell you that campaign volunteers are important. They're crucially important. Finally, academics are starting to figure that out themselves. And finally, yes, I reiterate again, you actually can make a difference as a volunteer in the upcoming election. Campaign managers will use you in their strategies, and it's very effective for them to do so.